Tonight, we are going to travel slowly into the ancient world, not through the noise of battlefields or the excitement of conquest, but through the quieter spaces that existed between them. We will follow Alexander the Great as he leaves the familiar landscapes of Macedonia and rides eastward into lands that, to him and to many of the people traveling with him, were increasingly unfamiliar. We will imagine the sound of horses moving over dry earth, the soft creaking of leather saddles, the distant voices of soldiers preparing a camp, and above everything, the steady movement of the night, wind across mountains, plains, rivers, and deserts. This is not a story about rushing toward an ending. It is a slow journey through landscapes that changed gradually, one horizon at a time. Alexander lived in the 4th century BCE, more than 2,000 years ago. And although the world he knew has disappeared in many ways, the landscapes through which he traveled still contain mountains, rivers, deserts, and open skies. So tonight, allow yourself to imagine that ancient world as it might have felt after sunset, when the day's heat began to fade. The camps became quieter, and the enormous distances ahead could no longer be seen. Imagine the first gentle movement of wind across the grass. Imagine a horse shifting its weight beside a tent. Imagine the small glow of an oil lamp. And then imagine yourself riding slowly eastward with no need to hurry, following the road that once carried one of history's most famous armies toward the unknown. Our journey begins in Macedonia, in the northern part of the ancient Greek world, where Alexander was born in 356 BCE. Macedonia was a land of mountains, valleys, forests, rivers, and open countryside. It was different from the dry landscapes that Alexander would eventually encounter much farther east. In the early morning, the hills could be covered in mist, and the slopes were often green after rain. Horses were central to Macedonian life, particularly among the aristocratic class, and Alexander himself was closely associated with horses from an early age. His famous horse Bucephalus became one of the enduring stories associated with him, although many details of the story have been preserved through later writers and should be treated as part of the historical tradition rather than as a perfectly documented account. Still, the image is fitting for our journey. A young king preparing to travel far beyond his homeland, accompanied by horses, soldiers, supplies, and an enormous ambition. Imagine the countryside before sunrise. The camp is quiet. The grass is damp. The horses breathe slowly in the cool air. A few guards remain awake while most of the army sleeps. Beyond the tents are dark hills, and beyond those hills are roads leading toward the sea. Alexander has already inherited the throne of Macedonia from his father, Philip II, and he has already become involved in the military and political affairs of Greece. But the great Eastern expedition is still ahead. There is something peaceful about imagining an ancient army before it begins moving. Modern armies are surrounded by machines, radios, engines, lights, and enormous logistical systems. Alexander's army depended on much simpler things: horses, human strength, carts, pack animals, ships, food, water, weapons, leather, wood, bronze, iron, cloth, and the ability to travel through landscapes without modern roads. Every object had to be carried, maintained, repaired, or replaced. Every day of movement depended on finding water and suitable ground for animals and people. A road was not simply a line on a map. It was a physical journey over stones, mud, hills, rivers, and open ground. So, as the first light begins to appear over Macedonia, imagine the quiet preparation. A soldier rolls up a blanket. Another checks the straps of a pack animal. Someone leads a horse toward the water. A small cooking fire begins to glow. The sounds are soft and practical. There is no dramatic music. There is only preparation. The army is waking. Alexander's expedition into Asia began in 334 BCE, when he crossed the Hellespont with his forces. The crossing itself carried enormous symbolic meaning. He was leaving Europe and entering Asia, and the journey that followed would eventually take him across regions stretching from Anatolia to Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Central Asia, and toward the Indian subcontinent. But tonight, we will not rush across that distance. We will travel slowly. Imagine the sea before the crossing. The water is calm beneath a pale morning sky. Ancient ships move slowly across the surface. Wooden hulls rise and fall with the waves. Ropes creak softly. Sails respond to the wind. The soldiers aboard can see land becoming smaller behind them. Some may have traveled before, but for many, this journey represents something entirely new. The coastline of Asia Minor appears ahead, growing slowly larger as the ships approach. The sea air is cool, and the wind moves across the deck. Alexander is entering a world that contains old cities, ancient kingdoms, unfamiliar languages, mountains, rivers, and deserts. The scale of what lies ahead is difficult to imagine. As the ships reach the coast of Asia Minor, the journey becomes a movement across land. The landscape of western Anatolia is varied. There are mountains, valleys, rivers, forests, dry plains, and fertile coastal regions. Greek cities had existed along the western coast for centuries, and the region was connected to the larger Persian Empire. Alexander's arrival was therefore not an arrival into an empty wilderness. It was an ancient landscape filled with communities, roads, fields, temples, markets, farms, and cities. Imagine riding inland away from the sea. The sound of waves slowly disappears behind you. Beneath the horse's hooves is dry earth and stone. Olive trees grow on hillsides. In the distance, mountains rise in layers of blue and gray. The air smells different from Macedonia. The sun feels stronger. The road winds through valleys where people have traveled for generations. Alexander and his companions are moving toward the interior. But tonight, we can pause beside one of the rivers and listen. A river in the ancient world was more than water. It was a road, a source of food, a boundary, a meeting place, and sometimes an obstacle. Rivers shaped the location of cities and settlements because reliable water made agriculture possible. They also offered natural routes through difficult landscapes. Alexander's army would repeatedly encounter rivers during its eastern journey. Some crossings would be straightforward, while others would become major logistical challenges. But at night, when an army is resting beside a river, the water becomes almost peaceful. Imagine the camp after sunset. The horses are tied or allowed to graze nearby. Soldiers sit quietly beside small fires. The river reflects fragments of firelight and stars. Beyond the opposite bank is darkness. The wind moves through reeds and grass. Somewhere farther upstream, water moves over stones. Alexander may be discussing the next day's route, but for a moment, the future can remain distant. The river does not know where the army intends to go. It simply continues flowing. The campaign moved through regions where Alexander confronted Persian forces, including the Battle of the Granicus in 334 BCE. We will not linger on the violence of battle tonight. Instead, imagine the landscape before the fighting, when an army approaches a river and the opposing forces are somewhere beyond it. Before history records formations and decisions, there is simply a landscape. There is water, there are hills, there is morning light. Thousands of people are gathered across a broad area, but each person still experiences the world individually. A soldier sees the horse in front of him. Another sees the river. Another hears a command. Another feels the dust beneath his sandals. When we step back from the historical record, the enormous events of history are made from countless small moments. Alexander's name has survived for more than 2,000 years, but the ordinary sounds surrounding him were probably much simpler. Horses, wind, water, leather, footsteps, and human voices. After the early stages of the campaign, Alexander continued through Asia Minor. He encountered cities with long histories and landscapes shaped by generations of farming and trade. Some places welcomed him, some resisted him, and others negotiated with him. His expedition was not a single uninterrupted march. It involved political decisions, sieges, military confrontations, diplomacy, rest, supply gathering, and movement through changing environments. For our sleep journey, we can allow the pace to slow between these events. Imagine a road winding through a valley during late afternoon. The army has been traveling for hours. Dust hangs lightly behind the horses. The sun is beginning to lower. Alexander rides near the front, surrounded by companions. Far behind are infantry, supply carts, animals, and camp followers. The army stretches along the road for a considerable distance. From the front, it may be impossible to see the end. As evening arrives, the soldiers begin looking for a place to camp. This process is practical rather than dramatic. The ground needs to be suitable. Water needs to be available. Animals need grazing or feed. The camp needs enough space. Fires are prepared. Tents are erected. Equipment is arranged. A commander may receive reports about the surrounding area. Guards are positioned. The sky slowly changes color. Gold becomes orange, orange becomes purple, and purple becomes deep blue. The mountains become silhouettes. This is the hour when the ancient world becomes especially quiet. Without electric lights, darkness arrives gradually and then becomes complete. A few lamps and fires remain visible. The stars become brighter. The wind becomes easier to hear because the daytime activity has stopped. Imagine Alexander walking through this camp after dark. He may be speaking with officers, checking preparations, or simply observing. We should not invent private thoughts for him, as though we know exactly what he felt. History does not preserve every thought or conversation, but we can imagine the physical environment around him. There would have been thousands of people, many horses, pack animals, tents, cooking fires, weapons, carts, and supplies. There would also have been an enormous sky. If the night were clear, the stars would appear much brighter than they do in most modern cities. The Milky Way would stretch across the darkness. The mountains would form black shapes against the sky. A breeze would move through the grass. Somewhere, a horse might make a quiet sound. Somewhere else, a soldier might cough or speak softly. Then the camp would settle again. Alexander's expedition was extraordinary partly because of the distances involved. The Persian Empire was enormous, stretching across many different environments and peoples. To travel through, it was to experience dramatic changes in geography. The landscapes of Western Anatolia were not the same as those farther east. Fertile river valleys eventually gave way to drier plains. Mountains became more imposing. The climate changed. Vegetation became more sparse. The languages and customs of the people changed from one region to another. An army traveling such a distance had to adapt continuously. This makes the journey especially interesting for a sleep documentary because the landscape itself becomes the main character. Instead of focusing on battles, we can watch the world change gradually outside the rider's path. Tonight, imagine yourself somewhere behind Alexander's main group, traveling slowly through a quiet valley. The road is uneven. Your horse's movement has become familiar. The rhythm is steady. Hoof, breath, hoof, breath. The wind moves through dry grass. A river is visible below. The sky is pale with the final light of evening. There is no need to know what tomorrow will bring. The road continues. Mountains wait in the distance. You can simply follow. Part 2. Into the Persian world, the further east Alexander traveled, the more the landscape began to change. Western Anatolia contained familiar Mediterranean features, but beyond the great mountain ranges lay environments that could feel increasingly dry and open. The Persian Empire had developed across an enormous variety of landscapes, and its roads connected regions that were separated by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. Imagine joining one of those ancient routes. The road runs between low hills. The grass is golden. A few trees grow beside a seasonal stream. Far away, mountains rise beneath a pale sky. Alexander's army moves slowly along the route. There is dust in the air, but the wind gradually carries it away. The sun is warm, yet the evening will become cool. The contrast between day and night is becoming more noticeable as the expedition moves farther into the interior. In 333 BCE, Alexander confronted the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus. place in a narrow coastal plain near the eastern Mediterranean, close to the region of modern Turkey and Syria. Again, rather than describing the violence, imagine the geography surrounding the event. Mountains approached the coast. The sea was nearby. The plain narrowed between natural barriers. Rivers and roads connected different regions. It was a landscape in which geography could influence the movement of armies. For a traveler, the mountains would have appeared enormous. The sea would have provided a familiar horizon, while the inland roads led toward lands that became progressively more distant from the Mediterranean world. After Issus, Alexander moved southward along the eastern Mediterranean coast. The journey took him through regions containing ancient cities and long-established cultures. One of the most famous episodes was the Siege of Tyre, which lasted for months. Tyre was an island city strongly associated with maritime trade. Alexander's forces eventually constructed a causeway toward the island, an enormous engineering effort. For our nighttime journey, imagine the Mediterranean coast after sunset. The sea is dark. Waves move slowly against the shore. Far away, lights from ships may be visible. The wind carries the smell of salt. On the horizon, the sky is filled with stars. Ancient sailors understood the sea through these stars, winds, coastlines, and currents. Alexander's campaign depended heavily on maritime connections, even though much of his army traveled overland. Once the expedition moved through the Levant and into Egypt, the scenery changed dramatically again. Egypt was shaped by the Nile. Beyond the river and its fertile floodplain lay desert. The contrast could be astonishing. Along the river, vegetation, fields, palms, and settlements followed the water. Just beyond them, the land became dry and open. Imagine approaching the Nile after traveling through arid terrain. The sight of water would have been striking. Green vegetation would appear suddenly along the riverbanks. Palm trees would rise against the sky. Irrigation channels would carry water into fields. Farmers would work the land. Boats would move along the river. The Nile was not simply a river passing through Egypt. It was the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Alexander entered Egypt in 332 BCE and was welcomed in many places as a liberator from Persian rule. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. Although the famous institutions later associated with Alexandria developed after his lifetime, the city's location was strategically important, connecting the Mediterranean with Egypt and the wider Eastern world. Imagine standing near the coast before the city existed in its later form. The Mediterranean stretches toward the horizon. Behind you is the Nile Delta, a landscape of waterways and fertile fields. The wind is constant. It carries salt from the sea and dust from the land. Somewhere in the distance, workers are establishing foundations and roads. A new city is beginning. But Alexander did not remain in Egypt. His journey continued eastward toward the heart of the Persian Empire. The landscape between Egypt and Mesopotamia included deserts, rivers, and fertile regions. The Euphrates and Tigris formed one of the great river systems of the ancient world. Mesopotamia, the land between these rivers, had been home to complex civilizations for thousands of years. Cities rose from the plains. Irrigation canals carried water across agricultural land. Roads connected settlements. Temples and palaces dominated major urban centers. Alexander was not entering a young world. He was moving through some of the oldest centers of civilization known in his time. Imagine riding beside a Mesopotamian canal at sunset. The water moves slowly. Palm trees stand along the bank. Fields stretch into the distance. The sky is orange near the horizon. A few birds cross above the water. Alexander's soldiers are tired after the day's march. The horses walk steadily. Somewhere ahead is a city. Somewhere behind is the road already traveled. The canal reflects the fading light. The night wind begins to rise. In 331 BCE, Alexander confronted Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela in northern Mesopotamia. The battle became one of the decisive moments of the campaign. After Alexander's victory, he advanced into the Persian imperial heartland. Babylon received him, and later he entered the great Persian capitals of Susa and Persepolis. These cities represented the wealth and power of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Persepolis, in particular, was an extraordinary ceremonial center with monumental stone architecture and carved reliefs. Imagine approaching such a city from across the surrounding plains. The mountains rise in the distance. The stone terraces catch the sunlight. Columns stand above the landscape. Carved figures line the walls. The architecture communicates power on a scale that would have been difficult to imagine for someone from a small rural settlement. At night, however, even the largest palace becomes quiet. Imagine the stone terraces beneath moonlight. The columns cast long shadows. The wind moves across the empty courtyards. Oil lamps glow in distant rooms. The army camps outside or nearby. Horses rest. Soldiers sleep. Alexander may walk through spaces built for Persian kings, but the night wind does not distinguish between kings and ordinary travelers. It moves across stone, grass, and tents in exactly the same way. Persepolis had existed before Alexander, and its history continued after his campaign. The ruins we see today are fragments of an ancient ceremonial complex. But during Alexander's lifetime, many structures were still standing. Imagine their surfaces brightly colored rather than weathered by thousands of years. Imagine textiles, polished stone, metal objects, wooden elements, gardens, and people moving through the courtyards. Ancient cities were not monochrome ruins. They were living places. At night, however, their colors would disappear into darkness, leaving only the shapes illuminated by firelight. Alexander's journey after Persia became even more ambitious. He moved into regions that were increasingly distant from the Mediterranean and Greek worlds. He crossed into Central Asia, entering lands corresponding broadly to modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and neighboring regions. Here, the geography became more demanding. Mountains mountains rose higher. Valleys narrowed. Deserts and semi-arid plains stretched between rivers. The climate could be severe. Winters could be cold. Summers could be extremely hot. Water became even more important. Imagine approaching a mountain range after days of traveling across open plains. The mountains appear first as faint blue shapes. Each day they become larger. The road begins to climb. Grass becomes thinner. Rocks become more common. The wind feels colder. The army moves more slowly. Horses require careful attention. Pack animals carry supplies through narrow paths. At night, the temperature falls quickly. A campfire becomes valuable not because it creates comfort in the modern sense, but because it provides warmth, light, and a place around which people can gather. Alexander's army crossed several difficult regions during the Central Asian campaigns. He founded settlements and established garrisons, and he fought local resistance. But the human geography was as important as the physical geography. Central Asia was not an empty wilderness. It was home to communities, farmers, pastoralists, traders, and local rulers. People lived along rivers and in valleys where water made agriculture possible. Others moved seasonally across grasslands with herds. The cultures Alexander encountered were diverse, and his campaign became increasingly connected to local political relationships. Imagine a small settlement beside a river at dusk. Mud brick walls hold the day's heat. Irrigation channels carry water toward fields. Beyond the cultivated land, dry hills rise toward mountains. A group of travelers approaches on horseback. They are not the first people to travel this road, and they will not be the last. For thousands of years, people moved across Central Asia, following water, pasture, trade routes, and political connections. Alexander's expedition became one chapter in a much older history of movement across the region. As night falls, the temperature drops. The wind moves across the river valley. The stars become extraordinarily bright. The camp is quiet. Alexander's horse stands nearby, its breath visible in the cool air. The mountains are black against the sky. There is something humbling about such a landscape. A person can command an army, but mountains do not obey. Rivers do not obey. Wind does not obey. Distance does not obey. The environment sets its own rhythm. Part 3. The mountains and the unknown. The Central Asian landscape gradually becomes the dominant presence in our journey. Imagine riding eastward with the mountains growing larger ahead. The roads are rougher. Valleys become narrower. Rivers become colder. Snow may remain on the highest peaks even when the lower valleys are warm. Alexander's soldiers are traveling farther from the familiar Mediterranean world. Their maps are incomplete. Reports from scouts become increasingly important. Local guides may know routes that outsiders do not. The army depends on information gathered from people who understand the land. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient travel. Today, when we see a mountain range on a map, we know its approximate shape, elevation, roads, passes, rivers, and settlements. Alexander's world did not have that certainty. A mountain could hide another valley beyond it. A river could become a barrier. A road could disappear. A pass could be blocked by snow. The unknown was not an abstract concept. It was physically present beyond the next ridge. Imagine Alexander stopping on a high ridge in the late afternoon. His horse stands quietly beside him. Below is an enormous valley. A river winds through the landscape, catching the light like a thin silver thread. Beyond it are mountains layered into the distance. Some peaks are blue, others are almost white. The wind moves strongly across the ridge. There is no city skyline, no road sign, no distant engine. Only mountains, water, grass, and sky. Alexander's army is somewhere behind him, moving slowly toward the same viewpoint. The horizon seems to continue forever. At night, the mountains become silhouettes. The temperature drops. The campfires appear as tiny orange points below. Imagine lying inside a simple tent. The canvas moves slightly whenever the wind rises. Outside, horses shift in the grass. Someone is speaking quietly near a fire. The sound fades. The wind returns. Then silence. This is the kind of environment in which sleep would have been deeply connected to the natural world. There was no artificial hum of electricity. No traffic. No glowing screen. Darkness was real. Alexander spent several years campaigning in Central Asia. His movements took him through regions where local resistance was persistent. The campaign was no longer simply about defeating the Persian king. It had become a complicated struggle involving local rulers, communities, mountain regions, and shifting alliances. Alexander adapted by incorporating local practices and people into his administration and army. His policy of combining Macedonian and Persian elements became increasingly visible, although it also caused tensions among some of his Macedonian companions. These political changes are important, but tonight we can let them remain in the background while we focus on the landscape. Imagine traveling along a river in what is now northern Afghanistan. The river is broad enough to guide the journey. Trees grow where water reaches the soil. Beyond the riverbank, the land becomes dry. Mountains rise in the distance. The road is dusty. The sun is strong. A group of riders moves slowly. The horses are tired, but they continue. Every few hours, the travelers stop to drink and rest. Water determines the pace. At sunset, the river becomes beautiful. The mountains turn purple. The grass becomes golden. The sky changes from blue to orange and then deep red. The army settles into camp. Some soldiers collect wood. Others care for horses. Food is prepared. The day ends. The wind begins to cool. Alexander may have spent the day dealing with reports, scouts, commanders, and political matters, but eventually even a king has to sleep. The night sky over Central Asia would have been spectacular. Far from modern cities, stars would have filled the darkness. Constellations that humans have watched for thousands of years would have been visible. The same stars that appeared over Babylon and Persia would now appear over Alexander's camp. The same moon that shone over Macedonia would shine over the mountains. This continuity of the sky is one of the most comforting aspects of historical imagination. The political world changes. Empires rise and disappear. Roads move. Cities become ruins. But the night sky remains familiar. Alexander's journey eventually brought him to the region around the Hindu Kush. These mountains form one of the great natural barriers of Central Asia. Crossing them was physically demanding. Imagine approaching the mountains in winter. The air becomes colder. Snow appears. Paths narrow. Horses struggle on steep ground. Soldiers wear additional layers. Supplies become difficult to move. The mountains are enormous, and the road ahead is uncertain. At night in the mountains, the wind sounds different. It moves through narrow valleys and around rocks. Sometimes it becomes stronger. Sometimes it fades completely. Snow reflects moonlight, creating a pale landscape. The stars seem close because the air is clear. Alexander's camp is small against the scale of the mountains. Imagine standing outside the tent and looking upward. The peaks are black. The sky is filled with stars. A horse breathes nearby. The fire burns low. Crossing mountains changes a person's relationship with distance. On a flat plain, the horizon is far away, and movement can be measured in long, straight lines. In mountains, a place that looks close may take hours to reach. A valley can turn unexpectedly. A road may climb sharply. A river may force travelers to change direction. The journey becomes a sequence of small decisions. Alexander's army had to negotiate this geography, one pass at a time. The mountains also create their own weather. Clouds gather around peaks. Snow can fall suddenly. Winds can become powerful. Sunlight changes quickly as clouds move across the valleys. A journey that begins under clear skies can become difficult within hours. Ancient travelers therefore depended on local knowledge and careful planning. A mountain pass was not simply a line between 2 points. It was an environment with its own dangers and rhythms. Imagine a morning after snowfall. The camp is quiet. Everything is covered in pale white. Horses stand near the tents. Smoke rises from a small fire. Soldiers prepare themselves slowly. Alexander mounts his horse. The army begins moving. Hooves leave prints in the snow. The road climbs toward a pass. Behind them, the valley disappears into mist. Ahead is another valley that no one can see yet. This is the feeling of the unknown that defines our journey tonight. Not fear, but uncertainty. Not darkness as danger, but darkness as distance. Alexander did not know every landscape he would see. His soldiers did not know how far the campaign would ultimately carry them. Even the leaders who planned routes had to respond to information as it arrived. Every horizon contained something they had not yet experienced. Eventually, Alexander descended from the mountain regions toward the Indian subcontinent. The environment changed again. Rivers became larger. Vegetation became denser in some regions. The climate could be warmer and more humid. The great rivers of the northwest Indian subcontinent created enormous landscapes. Alexander's army encountered unfamiliar animals cultures, political systems, and military traditions. The journey had now reached one of the farthest points of the expedition. But before reaching the great rivers, imagine one final night in the mountains. The army is camped beneath a clear sky. The fires are small. The horses are quiet. Alexander stands outside his tent. He looks toward the east. The mountains are dark. Beyond them are valleys, rivers, and lands he has never seen. The wind moves across the camp. It carries the smell of smoke and cold earth. Somewhere below, a river continues flowing. Part 4, Rivers, Plains, and the edge of the journey. As the army descends from the mountains, the world begins to open again. Valleys become broader. Vegetation becomes more abundant near water. Rivers grow wider. The landscape begins to feel less enclosed. Imagine riding along a broad river at sunrise. The water reflects the pale sky. Trees grow densely near the banks. Birds move through the branches. Beyond the river is an enormous plain. The air is warmer. The sound of water becomes constant. Alexander's campaign in the Indian subcontinent brought him into contact with powerful local rulers. One of the most famous was Porus, who fought Alexander at the Battle of the Hydesps in 326 BCE. The battle took place near the Hydesps River, now known as the Jhelum River in Pakistan. Again, the river itself is worth imagining. It was not simply a line on a map. It was a broad, natural feature that affected the movement of armies. Alexander famously crossed the river under difficult conditions, and the monsoon environment added complexity to the campaign. Imagine the river at night before the crossing. Rain may be falling. The water is dark and fast-moving. The opposite bank is barely visible. Trees and vegetation form shadows. The soldiers are quiet. Horses wait. The sound of the river dominates everything. Alexander's commanders are preparing, but from the perspective of a single traveler, the experience would be very simple. Darkness, water, wind, and uncertainty. The Indian monsoon would have introduced an entirely different relationship with rain. Alexander's army had traveled through dry deserts and mountains, and now they encountered a region where seasonal rainfall could transform the landscape. Rivers could swell. Roads could become muddy. Fields could become green. The air could become humid. Clouds could fill the sky. Imagine standing beneath a warm night rain beside an ancient river. Water falls steadily through leaves. The river surface is covered in ripples. The ground is soft beneath your feet. Somewhere in the darkness, frogs call. The army's tents are wet. Horses stand beneath whatever shelter is available. After the Battle of the Hydesps, Alexander continued farther east, but his army eventually refused to go farther at the Hyphasis River, generally identified with the Bios River. The soldiers had traveled for years. They had crossed enormous distances, fought numerous battles, endured difficult terrain, and moved far from home. Beyond the Hyphasis lay further territories, but the army was exhausted and unwilling to continue. Alexander eventually agreed to turn back. This moment is essential to our story because it reminds us that even Alexander's journey had a limit. He had traveled farther than many people in his world could have imagined, but he could not simply command endless movement. His army was made of human beings. They became tired. They missed their homes. They feared what might lie ahead. They had reached a psychological boundary as much as a geographical one. Imagine the night before the decision becomes final. The camp stretches beside the river. The wind moves through the grass. Fires burn quietly. Soldiers speak with one another. Some think about Macedonia. Others think about families and homes they have not seen for years. The river continues flowing eastward. Beyond it are lands Alexander will not conquer. The stars remain indifferent. The night does not announce that history is turning. It simply continues. The return journey would be long and difficult. Alexander divided his forces, and one of the most dangerous parts of the return was the march through the Gedrosian desert. The exact reasons for the route and the scale of the losses have been debated by historians, but ancient accounts describe severe hardship. For our sleep journey, we can imagine the desert without dwelling on suffering. Imagine instead the immense silence of a desert at night. The heat of the day has disappeared. Sand cools beneath the moon. The sky is enormous. The wind moves softly across dunes. Desert nights can be surprisingly cold after intense daytime heat. Imagine an ancient camp beneath the stars. The soldiers gather close to small fires. Horses stand quietly. The desert extends beyond the light. There are no trees to block the wind. No mountains nearby. Only sand, sky, and darkness. The stars seem almost impossibly bright. Alexander's journey had now become a return toward the west. The unknown lands he had entered years earlier were gradually becoming familiar in reverse. Rivers that once marked the beginning of a new region now marked the road home. Mountains that had seemed distant became recognizable. Cities became places where the army could rest. But the expedition had changed Alexander and his army profoundly. The ancient world Alexander traveled through was not connected by modern borders. There were no modern countries in the way we understand them. Instead, there were empires, kingdoms, city-states, tribes, communities, and cultural regions. Roads and rivers connected them. Trade moved across enormous distances. Languages changed from valley to valley. Religious practices differed. Clothing, architecture, food, and political systems varied. Alexander's campaign brought these worlds into closer contact, but it did not erase their differences. One of the consequences of Alexander's conquests was the spread of Greek language and culture across many parts of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East, while Greek and Macedonian communities also encountered local traditions. The period that followed is often called the Hellenistic period. Cities founded or reorganized during this era became centers of cultural exchange. Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Central Asian, and other traditions interacted in complicated ways. This was not a simple story of one culture replacing another. It was a long process of mixture, adaptation, and local development. Imagine a Hellenistic city at night several decades after Alexander's death. Greek-style columns stand beside buildings influenced by local traditions. Merchants speak different languages. Lamps glow along streets. People from different regions live and work together. The wind moves through the city. Somewhere nearby, the same rivers and mountains remain. Alexander himself is gone, but the networks created or expanded during his campaigns continue. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32. His death came soon after his return from the eastern campaigns. The exact cause remains uncertain, and ancient sources provide different accounts. What is certain is that his life was extraordinarily short compared with the enormous geographic reach of his campaigns. He had become king as a young man, and within little more than a decade, had created one of the largest empires of the ancient world. But tonight, we are not ending with his death. We are ending with the journey. Imagine Babylon at night. The city is quiet. The Euphrates moves through the darkness. Palm trees are silhouettes against the sky. The walls and buildings are illuminated by scattered lamps. Somewhere within the city is Alexander's final residence. Beyond the city are roads leading west, east, north, and south. Every direction contains another landscape. The river continues flowing. The wind continues moving. The stars continue shining. And Alexander's story has become part of the ancient landscape. Part 5. Riding into the night now, let us slow the journey completely. Imagine that we are somewhere far from the cities, far from the battlefields, far from the political decisions. It is simply nighttime. The army has stopped. The horses are resting. The fires are low. The road is quiet. You can hear the wind. It moves through dry grass. It touches the canvas of the tents. It passes over the river. It moves around the mountains. And then it continues eastward. Perhaps this is what Alexander heard on many nights during his journey. Not the sound of history, because history does not make a sound. Only the ordinary sounds of the world around him. Wind, water, horses, fire, footsteps, human voices fading into darkness. Imagine riding with Alexander before dawn. The camp is still asleep. You mount your horse slowly. The leather saddle creaks beneath you. The animal breathes into the cool air. Ahead, the road is barely visible. Behind you are the tents. Somewhere in the darkness, a guard watches the horizon. The first light appears. The mountains become gray. The grass becomes visible. The river begins reflecting the sky, and the journey continues. There is no need to imagine Alexander as a perfect hero. He was a historical human being, ambitious, charismatic, capable, and sometimes ruthless. His campaigns brought destruction as well as cultural exchange. Cities were besieged. People died. Populations were displaced. His legacy is complicated, but the landscapes through which he traveled can be considered separately from the myths that grew around him. Mountains are still mountains. Rivers are still rivers. Wind is still wind. Perhaps that is why historical journeys can be so calming. They remind us how small individual lives can be compared with landscapes and time. Alexander lived for only 32 years. His empire did not remain united for long after his death. His generals divided his territories. Kingdoms rose and fell. Cities changed. Roads disappeared. Languages evolved. Yet the mountains remained. The rivers remained. The deserts remained. The wind remained. Imagine standing beside one of those rivers today. The water is flowing just as it has flowed for thousands of years. Perhaps the river has changed its course. Perhaps the nearby settlements are different. Perhaps the trees have changed. But water continues moving toward the sea. This is the final rhythm of our journey. Movement without hurry. Change without interruption. A road leading toward another horizon. Alexander's expedition is often remembered as a story of conquest, but from another perspective, it was also one of movement through an enormous world. Every victory required travel. Every city required roads. Every mountain required a crossing. Every desert required water. Every river required a decision. The empire was created through movement, and movement was controlled by geography. The mountains decided where roads could pass. The rivers decided where armies could cross. The deserts decided where water could be found. The seasons decided how quickly people could travel. The horses decided how far riders could go. The wind decided how ships moved. The landscape was always present. So imagine one final ride. It is late evening. The sky is clear. The road is wide and empty. Alexander rides ahead. Behind him are a few companions. Farther behind are the rest of the army. The sun has disappeared. The mountains are dark. A river reflects the first stars. The horse beneath you walks at an easy pace. You do not need to reach the destination tonight. There is no reason to hurry. The wind is cool. The road continues. And somewhere beyond the next ridge is another valley. Perhaps beyond that valley is a river. Beyond the river is another mountain. Beyond the mountain is another plain. And beyond the plain is another horizon. This is what it means to travel into the unknown. The unknown is not always something frightening. Sometimes it is simply something not yet seen. A landscape beyond a mountain. A river beyond a valley. A road disappearing into darkness. A sunrise that has not yet arrived. Alexander kept moving toward those horizons until his army finally asked him to stop. And when they stopped, the world did not end. The road simply turned. The army began its return. The same landscapes looked different when traveled in the opposite direction. This is another quiet lesson of history. A journey changes not only the places we visit, but also the way we see the road behind us. Imagine looking back now. Macedonia is unimaginably far away. The Mediterranean is behind many mountains and rivers. Asia Minor is behind you. Persia is behind you. Central Asia is behind you. The great rivers of India are behind you. The desert is behind you. And ahead is only darkness. But the darkness is peaceful. The wind moves across the grass. A horse walks beneath the stars. The road continues. You can let your thoughts become slower now. You can stop following every historical detail. You can simply imagine the sound of the ancient world, soft hoofbeats, leather moving against leather, wind through grass, a distant river, a small fire, the quiet breathing of horses, the night sky, and the enormous silence between the sounds. This is how the ancient world might have felt when the day's activity was over. No engines, no electric lights, no traffic, no modern city, only natural darkness. The stars would have been brighter. The Milky Way would have stretched across the sky. The moon would have illuminated the landscape. And travelers would have navigated through the night by familiar landmarks and celestial patterns. Imagine Alexander's camp becoming smaller behind you. The fires appear as tiny orange points. The tents disappear into darkness. The road ahead becomes silver under the moon. You continue riding. The wind becomes stronger on the open plain, then softer near the river. You cross a small stream. Water moves around the horse's hooves. Ripples spread outward. The horse climbs the opposite bank. The road rises gently. At the top of the hill, the landscape opens again. Another valley, another river, another horizon. You stop for a moment. The horse lowers its head. The wind moves through the grass. Above you, the stars remain unchanged. Thousands of years ago, someone stood beneath this same sky. Perhaps not Alexander, perhaps a shepherd, perhaps a merchant, perhaps a farmer, perhaps a traveler whose name was never recorded. This is important to remember. Alexander is famous because history preserved his name. But the ancient world was populated by millions of people whose names disappeared. They traveled the same roads. They watched the same stars. They listened to the same wind. They crossed the same rivers. They built homes. They planted crops. They cared for animals. They raised children. They watched sunsets. They slept beneath the sky. History often remembers kings. The landscape remembers everyone. And tonight, as we leave Alexander's journey behind, we can let the famous name become quieter. The road belongs to everyone now. The mountains belong to everyone. The wind belongs to everyone. The river belongs to everyone. The night sky belongs to everyone. Imagine dawn beginning again. The horizon becomes pale. The stars disappear one by one. The mountains become visible. The river turns silver. The grass becomes golden. The horses begin to move. The camp wakes. Someone opens a tent. Someone prepares food. Someone checks a saddle. Someone leads a horse toward the water. And slowly, the ancient world begins another day. Alexander mounts his horse. The road continues. But you do not need to follow him any farther. You can remain beside the river. You can listen to the wind. You can watch the first sunlight move across the mountains. The journey has already taken us thousands of kilometers through an ancient world, from Macedonia to the Hellespont, across Anatolia, along the Mediterranean, through Egypt, across Mesopotamia, into Persia, through Central Asia, across mountains, toward the great rivers of the Indian subcontinent, and finally back toward Babylon. It was a journey of enormous scale, but it was made one day at a time, one road at a time, one river at a time, one night at a time. And perhaps that is the quietest way to understand Alexander the Great, not as a distant statue, not only as a conqueror, but as a traveler moving through landscapes, a rider beneath the stars, a person surrounded by mountains and rivers, a human being who, despite the size of his ambitions, still depended on the same things as every other traveler: water, food, shelter, animals, roads, companions, rest, and sleep. So let the final image be simple: a wide, ancient landscape beneath the night sky, a river moving quietly through the valley, a small camp in the distance, a horse standing beside a tent. The fire has almost gone out. The mountains are dark. The stars are bright. The wind moves gently across the grass. Alexander's journey has ended, but the road remains. The river continues. The mountains remain. And the night wind carries the sound of the ancient world farther into the darkness. You can let the journey fade now. The distant hoofbeats become softer. The river becomes quieter. The campfire becomes a small point of light. The mountains disappear into shadow. And above everything, the stars remain. For a moment, there is nothing left to discover, nothing left to conquer, nothing left to reach. Only the road, only the wind, only the quiet movement of the night. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another dawn is waiting. The road continues beneath the fading darkness, and the world around you becomes quieter with every passing moment. The last stars are still visible above the mountains, but the eastern horizon has begun to change, almost imperceptibly at first, from deep blue to a softer shade of gray. Alexander rides ahead at an unhurried pace, his horse following the familiar rhythm of the road. Behind him, the distant movement of the army is barely noticeable. There is no need for commands now. The night has settled into its final hours, and even the animals seem to understand that morning is approaching. The wind travels across the open grassland, bending the tall stems in long, gentle waves before disappearing into the darkness. From somewhere below comes the quiet sound of a river, moving patiently through the valley. The river does not know the names of kings or the boundaries of empires. It simply follows the shape of the land, carrying water around stones and through bends that have been shaped over centuries. Alexander's horse continues forward, its hooves making a soft and regular sound against the earth. For a while, there is nothing else to hear. The road, the wind, the river, and the breathing of the horse become a single quiet rhythm. And the enormous journey that once seemed so distant begins to feel like a slow passage through a dream. Far behind this quiet road are the lands of Macedonia, where Alexander's journey began. The mountains of his childhood are now separated from him by enormous distances. But memory would have been one of the few things capable of traveling that far without requiring a road. We cannot know exactly what Alexander thought about Macedonia during the later years of his campaigns, and it is better not to place invented thoughts into his mind. But we can understand that his homeland was increasingly distant in practical terms. The people who had known him as a young prince were now separated from him by deserts, rivers, mountains, and political borders. Many of the soldiers who had left Macedonia with him had also been away for years. Some had grown older during the expedition. Some had formed relationships in distant lands. Some had never returned. Others had become accustomed to the landscapes of Asia and could no longer imagine the world exactly as it had been when they left. This is one of the quiet consequences of a long journey. Distance does not simply separate places. It changes the people who travel between them. A person who leaves home for a few days may return almost unchanged, but someone who spends years moving through unfamiliar countries gradually becomes a different traveler. Roads become familiar. Strange foods become ordinary. Foreign landscapes become memories. The unknown slowly becomes known, and then another unknown appears beyond it. Imagine now that the road passes through a narrow valley where the wind is softer. Tall trees grow near the river, their branches moving gently above the water. The ground is cooler here, and the air carries the scent of wet earth. Alexander slows his horse for a moment. Ahead, the river bends around a low hill, and the road follows it. The landscape has no monuments to mark the journey. There are no signs explaining what happened here. There may once have been a settlement nearby, or a temporary camp, or perhaps only a group of travelers who stopped beside the water for a night. Most of those traces have disappeared. This is true of almost every ancient journey. The majority of places people passed through left no permanent record. A camp could exist for one night and vanish the next morning. Footprints would disappear beneath wind and rain. Ashes would scatter. Grass would slowly grow over disturbed soil. The people would continue onward. Thousands of years later, only the landscape remains. In this way, the earth becomes a quiet archive, preserving some things while allowing countless others to disappear. The sun finally rises over the horizon, and the first light touches the highest mountains. Their dark silhouettes become visible again, revealing ridges and valleys that were hidden during the night. The river below begins to reflect the morning sky. Birds call from the trees along its banks. The wind is still present, but the air is becoming warmer. The army begins to wake behind you. Tents open. Fires are rekindled. Horses are led toward water. Soldiers prepare food and check their equipment. The ancient world has entered another day. Somewhere among the tents, Alexander is preparing to continue the journey. The process is familiar by now. A journey of thousands of kilometers is built from mornings like this, repeated again and again. Wake, prepare, travel, rest, travel again. There is nothing spectacular about the routine itself, yet the accumulated distance becomes extraordinary. A person does not cross an empire in a single moment. They cross it through thousands of ordinary actions. The morning road leads toward a broad plain. The mountains slowly move behind you, and the horizon opens. The grass is dry and golden, but small green areas appear wherever water reaches the soil. A group of birds rises from the riverbank as the army approaches. The horses walk steadily, their shadows stretching long across the ground. The sunlight is gentle at first, but it will become stronger as the day continues. For a while, the road follows the river. This is a natural choice because water provides both direction and resources. Ancient travelers often moved along rivers, even when the route was difficult, because the presence of water could determine whether a journey was possible. The river also provides a sense of continuity. When the road disappears around a hill, the water remains visible. When the landscape becomes confusing, the river offers orientation. When the heat becomes intense, the river offers relief. For an ancient traveler, a river could be one of the most reassuring features in an unfamiliar landscape. The expedition had repeatedly encountered this relationship between water and movement. In Macedonia, rivers flowed through greener valleys. In Anatolia, they crossed mountain landscapes and fertile plains. In Mesopotamia, the great rivers supported enormous civilizations. In Central Asia, rivers created narrow zones of fertility within otherwise dry environments. In the Indian subcontinent, enormous waterways shaped entire regions. Each river had a different character, but the fundamental relationship remained the same. Water created pathways through the landscape. It allowed settlements to exist. It supported crops and animals. It carried boats. It divided territories. It sometimes stopped armies, and sometimes helped them travel. A river could be a boundary and a bridge at the same time. Alexander's expedition was therefore, in many ways, a journey from river to river. As the day grows warmer, imagine the army stopping beneath scattered trees near the water. The horses are allowed to rest. Soldiers remove heavy equipment for a while. Some sit quietly in the shade. Others prepare a simple meal. The river continues flowing beside them. The sound of water makes conversation feel unnecessary. A person can sit beside a river for a long time without becoming bored because the surface is always changing. Light moves across it. Leaves drift downstream. Small ripples form and disappear. Birds land on the banks and fly away. The current moves around stones. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. This is exactly the kind of scene that can help us slow our imagination. The historical journey does not need to be filled with constant events. Between every famous battle and political decision were hours of walking, riding, waiting, eating, resting, and watching the landscape. Alexander's world was full of waiting. Armies waited for supplies. Ships waited for favorable winds. Travelers waited for rivers to become passable. Scouts waited for information. Soldiers waited for orders. People waited for weather to change. Modern life often creates the impression that waiting is wasted time, but ancient travel was built around it. The wind could not be commanded to change. A storm could not be turned off. A river could not always be crossed immediately. A mountain pass might require preparation. Waiting was part of the journey. Perhaps this is another reason to imagine ancient travel at night. There was less pressure to fill every moment. Darkness naturally created periods of stillness. After the day's movement, there were hours when the safest and most practical choice was simply to remain where you were. Imagine the evening returning to the river valley. The heat has disappeared. The sky is turning gold. The army has established its camp again. Tents stand in loose rows. Horses graze along the water. Small fires appear one after another as the light fades. The mountains in the distance turn from green and brown to purple, and then nearly black. The river catches the last light of the sun. The sound of the camp gradually becomes softer. Conversations become quieter. The cooking fires burn lower. Eventually, the first stars appear. The same cycle has begun again. Another day has passed, and another section of the road has been traveled. Somewhere beyond the camp lies the road ahead. It may lead toward another settlement, another mountain, another river, another desert. Alexander's expedition was always connected to what came next. Even when one destination was reached, another was waiting. This constant movement helped create the enormous geographical reach of his campaigns, but it also created exhaustion. The farther the army traveled, the farther home became. The soldiers' decision to stop at the Hyphasis was therefore not simply a refusal to obey. It was the accumulated result of years of movement. Their bodies had traveled across landscapes that most people of their time could never have imagined. Their minds had absorbed countless new places. They had seen the Persian capitals, the deserts, the mountains, the great rivers, and the distant cultures of the East. Eventually, the desire to return became stronger than the desire to continue. Imagine that moment without drama. Imagine thousands of tired people beneath a quiet sky, listening to a river. They know there are more lands ahead. They know Alexander wants to continue. But they also know that they have traveled farther than they ever expected. Some may think of parents who are now old. Some may think of children born while they were away. Some may wonder what their homes look like after so many years. Others may simply be tired. The river continues flowing beside them. The night wind moves through the grass. History will later describe decisions, arguments, and consequences. But the physical experience may have been much simpler. People sitting beneath the stars, wanting to go home. The return journey changes the meaning of the landscape. A mountain that once represented an unknown obstacle becomes a familiar landmark. A river that once marked the beginning of unfamiliar territory becomes a route toward home. A city that once seemed foreign becomes a place where the army has already passed. Travel changes memory. The same road can feel different depending on the direction in which you walk it. On the way east, every horizon promises something new. On the way west, every familiar landmark suggests that home is becoming closer. Yet the journey remains long. Imagine crossing the same Central Asian plains again. The wind is strong. The grass moves continuously. The sky is enormous. The army travels in a long line. There are fewer unknowns now, but there is still uncertainty. The weather may change. Supplies may become difficult. Rivers still need to be crossed. Deserts still need to be passed. The human body still becomes tired. The return journey is not automatically easier simply because the destination is familiar. In some ways, the knowledge of how far remains can make a journey feel longer. At night, the camp becomes quiet. Alexander may sit near a fire. The horses rest. The soldiers sleep. The stars appear. The same sky that watched the army move east now watches it move west. There is something almost circular about the image. The expedition began with a crossing away from home and gradually became a journey across an enormous portion of the known world. Now the direction has reversed, but the traveler is not the same person who left Macedonia. The army is not the same army. The world is not the same world. The journey has changed everyone involved. The night wind continues to move across the camp. It passes over tents, horses, weapons, carts, and sleeping travelers. It does not carry the voices of the past. It carries only air. Yet, when we imagine it now, it can become a bridge between centuries. The same kind of wind would have moved through ancient camps, over Persian plains, across Central Asian grasslands, around Egyptian temples, and through Macedonian valleys. The sound itself is not ancient. Wind has no age, but it can help us imagine an older world because it remains familiar. Perhaps this is the most soothing part of historical imagination, recognizing that, although human societies change, nature often moves at a slower rhythm. Mountains change very slowly. Rivers change gradually. Grass grows and disappears with the seasons. The stars continue their courses. The moon rises and sets. Wind crosses the same broad landscapes. These things give the past a sense of continuity. Alexander's empire disappeared, but the mountains through which he traveled did not disappear. His armies are gone, but the rivers remain. The camps have vanished, but the night wind still crosses the plains. So let the journey slow again. Imagine a horse walking beneath a dark sky. Imagine the rider wrapped in a simple cloak. Imagine the road stretching forward. Imagine the wind moving gently from the mountains. Imagine a river somewhere below. The camp behind you is becoming quieter. The fires are becoming smaller. The stars are becoming brighter. And the road continues. There is no need to know exactly where it leads tonight. The ancient world was full of roads that disappeared beyond the horizon. Travelers followed them because there was somewhere they hoped to reach. But along the way, they experienced landscapes they could not have imagined before leaving home. That is perhaps the quietest meaning of Alexander's journey. The world was larger than he knew when he began. It remained larger than he knew when he finished. No matter how far he traveled, there were always mountains beyond mountains, rivers beyond rivers, and lands beyond the horizon. Even Alexander, who traveled farther than most rulers of his age, could not reach the end of the world. There was no end to reach. There were simply more places. Tonight, we can leave him there for a moment, riding beneath the stars. The road beneath his horse is quiet. The grass moves in the wind. The mountains stand far away. The river continues through the valley, and the ancient night slowly passes toward morning. The night deepens over the ancient road as Alexander and his companions continue slowly across the open country, and the darkness seems to soften everything around them. The mountains that appeared so enormous during the day have become dark silhouettes, their shapes blending into the night sky, while the river below catches occasional fragments of moonlight whenever the clouds move apart. The horses walk at an easy pace, their hooves pressing into the earth with a steady rhythm that requires no explanation and no command. Behind them, the great army has settled into the quiet routines of a traveling camp, with tents standing in loose rows, animals resting beside their handlers, and small fires glowing beneath the dark sky. The wind passes over everything without stopping, moving through the grass, touching the canvas of the tents, crossing the river, and continuing toward the distant mountains. Alexander's journey has often been remembered through battles and victories, but most of his days were not spent fighting. Most of the journey was made from ordinary hours like this, hours of movement and waiting, preparation and rest, heat during the day and cold after sunset. Long stretches of road where nothing remarkable happened except that the army continued moving. For the people who traveled with him, these ordinary moments would have occupied far more of their lives than the famous events that later became part of history. A soldier might remember the sound of a river beside the camp, the smell of smoke from a cooking fire, the weight of a wet cloak after rain, or the way the mountains looked at sunset more clearly than he remembered the exact words spoken by a commander. History tends to preserve moments of action, but human memory is often filled with quieter details. And tonight, we can allow those quieter details to become the center of the journey. The road gradually leaves the river and begins to climb toward a low range of hills, and the sound of water becomes more distant until it is replaced by the movement of wind through dry grass. Alexander's horse continues forward without urgency, following the riders ahead. The darkness makes the road seem narrower than it really is, and the horizon has almost disappeared, leaving only the faint outline of the hills against the sky. This would have been a familiar experience for ancient travelers. Without modern maps, artificial lighting, or illuminated roads, night travel was very different from what it is today. Travelers depended on familiar landmarks, the moon, stars, local knowledge, and the practical judgment of experienced guides. An unfamiliar road could disappear completely after sunset, which meant that armies usually planned their movements around daylight, unless circumstances required otherwise. When night travel did occur, the darkness would have felt much deeper than the darkness surrounding most modern towns and cities. There would have been no distant glow from electric lights on the horizon, no headlights approaching from far away, and no constant mechanical sound in the background. Instead, there would have been natural darkness interrupted only by firelight, moonlight, stars, and occasional lamps. Imagine stopping your horse on this road and looking around. For a moment, there may be nothing visible except the faint shape of another rider, the dark outline of a hill, and a few stars above. Yet there is nothing unnatural about the darkness. It is simply the ordinary night of the ancient world, a night experienced by farmers, shepherds, merchants, soldiers, sailors, and travelers for thousands of years before artificial light transformed the human relationship with darkness. As the horse climbs the hill, the air becomes cooler and the wind grows slightly stronger. From the top of the ridge, the landscape opens once again, revealing a wide plain beneath the stars. Somewhere far below, a few scattered lights mark settlements or distant camps, but most of the landscape is completely dark. Alexander pauses for a moment, and the horse lowers its head while the rider looks toward the horizon. There is no reason to imagine a dramatic speech or a great declaration. The scene can remain quiet. A traveler has reached the top of a hill and is simply looking across the land. Yet the view carries a strange significance, because Alexander has reached places that were once only names in distant reports. When he began his campaign, the Persian Empire was an enormous political entity stretching across territories that many Macedonians would never see. As the campaign progressed, those distant names became physical landscapes. Rivers became water beneath his horse. Mountains became roads that had to be climbed. Cities became places where the army slept. Deserts became stretches of sand and heat. The unknown gradually became physical and familiar. This is one of the most interesting aspects of long-distance travel in the ancient world. Geography was not something that could simply be viewed from above. It had to be experienced from the ground, one valley at a time. A mountain was not a blue shape on a map, but a slope that took hours to climb. A river was not a thin line, but a body of water that had to be crossed. A desert was not an empty yellow area on parchment, but a place where water, shade, and distance determined every decision. Morning eventually arrives, although the change is so gradual that it is difficult to identify the exact moment when night ends. The stars disappear one by one, and the eastern sky becomes pale. The hills emerge from darkness, first as shadows, and then as recognizable slopes covered with grass and scattered rocks. The wind remains cool, but the first warmth of sunlight begins to touch the higher ground. Alexander's companions begin moving again, and the road slowly fills with travelers. The quiet sounds of preparation return. Horses are saddled, equipment is checked, and supplies are loaded. Some soldiers gather around small fires to prepare food, while others lead animals toward nearby water. This repeated routine would have been one of the defining experiences of the campaign. An army cannot move simply because its commander wants it to move. Every morning requires hundreds or thousands of practical decisions. Food must be distributed. Animals must be prepared. Equipment must be checked. Roads must be assessed. And scouts must report what lies ahead. The larger the army, the more complicated these routines become. Alexander's forces included cavalry, infantry, engineers, servants, craftsmen, administrators, and people responsible for supplies and animals. The army was not a single moving body in the simple sense. It was a temporary society traveling across the landscape, carrying with it the resources needed to survive far from home. When the army stopped, a temporary settlement appeared. When it moved, that settlement disappeared, leaving only tracks, ashes, disturbed soil, and perhaps a few objects that were lost along the way. The sun rises higher as the army begins moving across the plain, and the landscape becomes warmer and brighter. The distant mountains appear blue in the morning haze, while the nearer grasslands glow with shades of gold and green. The horses move in long lines, and the supply animals follow behind. Alexander and his closest companions remain near the front, where they can receive information from scouts and communicate with other officers. The road itself may not always be clearly defined, especially in open country, and local knowledge would have been valuable. A path that looks obvious from a distance can become confusing when several smaller routes branch away toward farms, rivers, or settlements. Ancient travelers therefore relied heavily on people who knew the region. Guides, scouts, merchants, local officials, and communities all contributed to the movement of large groups across unfamiliar landscapes. The campaign was therefore not simply a Macedonian journey through a foreign world. It depended on interactions with the people already living in those places. Roads existed because people used them. Fields existed because people cultivated them. Irrigation channels existed because communities maintained them. Markets existed because merchants traveled between settlements. Even when Alexander's army entered a region as a conquering force, it was moving through landscapes that had already been shaped by generations of human activity. By afternoon, the road reaches another river, smaller than the great waterways Alexander encountered farther east, but still important enough to determine where the army will stop. The water is clear in places and cloudy in others, depending on the soil carried downstream. Trees grow along the banks, providing shade from the strongest part of the day. The army begins to slow, and some soldiers lead horses toward the water. Animals drink deeply after the long morning journey. People wash their faces and hands. Equipment is checked and adjusted. The riverbank becomes a temporary place of rest. There's something almost timeless about this scene because the basic needs are so simple. Humans and animals need water, shade, food, and rest regardless of the century in which they live. Alexander may be remembered as a king and conqueror, but on a hot afternoon beside a river, he would still depend on the same physical necessities as everyone around him. His horse needs water. His body needs rest. His clothing needs protection from the sun. His companions need food. The enormous political ambitions of the campaign become distant when viewed from this ordinary perspective. An empire may be measured in territories and cities, but a journey is measured in water, miles, meals, and nights of sleep. The river becomes especially peaceful as evening approaches. The heat begins to disappear, and the shadows of the trees grow longer across the water. The army establishes another camp nearby, choosing higher ground that is safe from sudden changes in the river level. Tents are raised, animals are arranged, and fires begin to appear as the light fades. Somewhere in the distance, a few birds move through the trees before settling for the night. The mountains turn from gray to purple, and then nearly black. The river reflects the final light of the sky, and small insects move above the surface. Alexander may spend part of the evening discussing the next stage of the journey, but eventually the practical work of the day ends. The camp becomes quieter. This daily transition from movement to rest would have been repeated hundreds of times during the expedition. Every evening provided a temporary pause, and every morning began another stage. The people traveling with Alexander would have become deeply familiar with the process. They would know how to choose a place for a tent, how to prepare a horse, how to protect supplies from rain, how to build a fire, and how to sleep on unfamiliar ground. Travel was not an unusual activity for them anymore. It had become their way of life. As darkness settles over the river, the wind begins to move through the trees, and the camp becomes a collection of small sounds rather than one large sound. Somewhere a horse shifts its feet. Somewhere a soldier speaks quietly. A piece of wood breaks in a fire. Water moves over stones. Fabric moves against a tent pole. Then there are long periods when nothing seems to happen at all. The stars appear above the camp, brighter than they were during the day, and the river becomes a dark ribbon beneath them. Imagine lying inside a simple tent after such a day. There is no need to think about the next 100 kilometers. There is no need to imagine the final destination. The body is tired from hours of riding and walking, and the sounds outside gradually become part of the background. The wind rises and falls. The river continues moving. The horse outside breathes quietly. Sleep becomes easier because the world itself has become slower. In this ancient landscape, night is not an interruption to life. It is one of the natural rhythms around which life is organized. Far beyond this camp are the cities and capitals that Alexander's army has already visited. Babylon lies somewhere to the west, Persia farther beyond it, and Macedonia is separated by enormous distances of land and sea. Yet, in the darkness, all of those places become equally invisible. A traveler cannot see an empire at night. They can only see the immediate landscape. This may have made the ancient world feel smaller in one sense and larger in another. Without maps that displayed the entire planet, people experienced geography through direct movement. The world expanded as they traveled. Each new valley added another place to memory. Each new city added another name. Each mountain created another landmark. The map existed partly in the minds of travelers, built from roads, rivers, stories, and experience. Alexander's campaign expanded that mental map enormously. but it could never make the world completely known. Beyond every horizon remained another region, another people, another river, or another mountain. The wind becomes stronger during the middle of the night, and the tents move gently beneath its pressure. The horses stand quietly, their bodies barely visible in the darkness. The fire has become mostly embers, glowing softly beneath a layer of ash. Above, the stars stretch across the sky in patterns that ancient travelers had watched for generations. Many of the constellations would have been familiar to people living around the Mediterranean and Near East, even though their meanings and stories varied between cultures. The sky itself connected the different regions through which Alexander traveled. The same moon that rose over Macedonia later rose over Persia. The same stars appeared above Egypt and Central Asia. Political borders could change, languages could change, and cities could rise and fall. But the night sky remained a shared environment. For a traveler far from home, this continuity may have been comforting. Even when the land beneath the feet was unfamiliar, the heavens above could still provide a sense of orientation and familiarity. At some point before dawn, the wind becomes softer again. The river can be heard more clearly, and the camp is almost completely silent. The journey pauses. Alexander sleeps somewhere among the tents, although we do not know exactly how he spent every night or where he slept during every stage of the campaign. Around him, thousands of people are also resting. Some are asleep deeply. Others are awake on guard duty. Some horses are standing while others lie down. A few fires continue burning. The ancient world has become still. This is perhaps the closest we can come to the feeling of being present in Alexander's journey, without pretending to know details that history has not preserved. We cannot hear his private conversations or know his thoughts, but we can imagine the landscape that surrounded him. We can imagine the river, the mountains, the wind, the horses, the stars, and the quiet movement of an army resting between one day and the next. And so the road waits for morning, just as it waited for countless travelers before Alexander and countless travelers after him. The river continues toward the distant lowlands, carrying water through the darkness. The mountains remain silent beyond the valley. The grass moves gently under the night wind. Somewhere beyond the horizon is another road, another landscape, and another day of travel. But there is no need to reach it yet. For now, the journey can remain here beside the river, beneath the stars, with the camp sleeping quietly and the wind passing through the darkness. The ancient world does not need to become louder to remain fascinating. It can remain slow. It can remain distant. It can remain almost still. Alexander's name may have traveled through history for thousands of years, but tonight his journey can become something much simpler. A horse moving quietly through an ancient landscape, a river flowing beside the road, a cool wind crossing the grass, and a traveler resting beneath an endless sky. The next morning arrives quietly over the river valley, and the first light touches the landscape long before the camp becomes fully awake. The mountains appear first, their upper edges catching a faint silver glow, while the lower slopes remain hidden in shadow. The river reflects the changing sky, moving steadily past the sleeping camp as though nothing has happened and nothing needs to happen. Slowly, the tents begin to stir. A soldier steps outside and looks toward the eastern horizon. Another begins preparing the morning fire. Horses lift their heads as people approach, and the familiar sounds of leather straps, wooden wheels, footsteps, and quiet voices begin to replace the silence of the night. Alexander's journey has reached this stage many times before, and the routine is almost automatic. The army does not need a dramatic signal to understand that another day has begun. People simply wake because the light has returned. Supplies are gathered, animals are prepared, tents are folded, and the temporary settlement begins to disappear. Within a few hours, the place that had been filled with thousands of people will become almost empty again. Perhaps a few ashes will remain where the fires burned. Perhaps footprints will mark the ground near the river. Perhaps some broken piece of equipment will be left behind. But the camp itself will be gone, and the river will continue flowing, as though no army had ever stopped there. As Alexander mounts his horse, the landscape ahead is already bright enough to see clearly. The road follows the edge of the valley before turning toward a distant range of hills. The air is cool, and a gentle wind moves across the open ground. There is something comforting in the repetition of the journey now. The horse knows the rhythm. The rider knows the movement. The road does not need to be hurried. Alexander's campaign is often imagined as a sequence of enormous achievements, but those achievements were built from countless ordinary hours like this one. A horse walks. A rider watches the road. A scout rides ahead. A supply cart follows behind. A soldier carries a shield. Another carries food. Someone repairs a strap. Someone searches for water. Someone looks toward the mountains. History eventually compresses these experiences into a few sentences, but the people who lived through them experienced every kilometer separately. A journey that later appears almost impossible was, at the time, simply a series of days that had to be completed one after another. Perhaps the greatest distance Alexander traveled was not measured in kilometers at all, but in the number of mornings he woke far from home and chose to continue. The road eventually rises toward another broad plateau, and the river becomes smaller behind the travelers. The land is drier here, with scattered shrubs and patches of golden grass covering the hills. The wind is stronger, and clouds move quickly across the sky. Alexander's cloak shifts with every gust, while the horses lower their heads slightly against the wind. In the distance, the mountains appear almost motionless, but as the army approaches them, their details become clearer. Ancient travelers would have experienced this gradual revelation constantly. A mountain scene from 20 kilometers away looks like a simple shape, but as you approach, valleys, cliffs, ridges, and paths begin to appear. The landscape becomes more complicated. A journey, therefore, changes what the traveler sees without changing the mountain itself. The mountain was always there, but distance had hidden its details. The same could be said about the world Alexander entered. From Macedonia, Persia had been an enormous, distant empire. From inside Persia, it became a collection of cities, rivers, roads, farms, mountains, and people. From even closer, every city became a collection of individual streets and buildings, and every building became a place where individual lives unfolded. Distance simplifies the world. Travel reveals its complexity. By late afternoon, the army reaches the beginning of a long mountain pass. The road narrows, and the landscape becomes quieter. The wind moves through the rocks with a low, steady sound. Horses walk more carefully. Supply animals are guided around uneven ground. The soldiers have to concentrate on where they place their feet. The mountains on either side create a feeling of enclosure after the openness of the plains. Yet there is also a sense of shelter here. The cliffs block some of the wind, and the road is protected from the wider landscape. Alexander's column becomes stretched along the pass, with riders disappearing around bends and reappearing farther ahead. From the front, the end of the army may be impossible to see. From the rear, the leading riders are equally distant. A long expedition is always like this. People travel together, but they experience the road in different positions. Someone at the front sees the landscape first. Someone at the back sees it later. Some travel quickly, others slowly. Some remain near the commander, while others spend most of their time with the animals and supplies. The army is one body only when viewed from a distance. Up close, it is thousands of separate journeys occurring at the same time. As evening approaches, the army finds a sheltered place within the mountains and begins preparing for the night. The campfires appear slowly, one after another, creating small points of warmth against the darkening stone. Horses are brought closer together. Tents are placed where the ground is relatively level. The mountains catch the last sunlight, turning briefly orange before becoming purple and then black. The air becomes cold. The wind passes through the higher ridges and descends into the valley in gentle waves. There is no need for conversation to continue for long. After a day of travel through difficult terrain, people naturally become quieter. A simple meal is prepared. Water is shared. Equipment is placed where it can be found in the morning. Then the camp begins to settle. Imagine standing at the edge of the firelight and looking upward. The mountains seem enormous. Above them, the first stars appear. The darkness is deeper here than on the open plains because the cliffs block the distant horizon. Yet, the sky above remains vast, and the stars are clear. Alexander's journey through mountains also reminds us how dependent ancient armies were on practical knowledge. A commander could possess enormous ambition, but ambition could not remove a mountain. A road had to be found. A pass had to be crossed. Animals had to survive the journey. Food had to be carried. Water had to be located. Weather had to be considered. The landscape constantly imposed limits. This is why the image of Alexander riding into the unknown is so powerful. The unknown was not simply a place on the far side of the map. It was present every time the road turned around a mountain and revealed something that could not previously be seen. It was present whenever scouts disappeared beyond a ridge and returned with information. It was present whenever the army entered a valley that none of the Macedonian soldiers had previously seen. The journey was therefore filled with small discoveries, most of which were never recorded. During the night, the mountain wind becomes stronger. It passes over the camp and moves through the narrow valley, sometimes becoming almost silent, and then returning with a soft rush. The fires bend slightly beneath the breeze. The horses remain calm. The tents shift gently. Somewhere above, clouds move across the stars, covering them for a few minutes before the sky becomes clear again. This is the kind of night that could make time feel different. Without clocks, there would be no need to divide the darkness into precise minutes. People could judge the passage of night through the stars, the temperature, the moon, the changing wind, and eventually the appearance of dawn. Sleep would come in natural rhythms. A person might wake briefly because the fire has become low, or because a horse has moved nearby, then return to sleep while the wind continues outside. The night would not be filled with notifications or artificial sounds demanding attention. It would simply pass. Eventually, the expedition leaves the mountains and enters another broad plain. The change is immediate. The horizon expands. The wind becomes wider and more open. The road stretches forward without the sharp turns of the mountain pass. In the distance, a river glitters beneath the morning light. The army begins moving toward it. Alexander's horse seems to settle into an easier rhythm. The landscape is once again dominated by open sky. For a traveler who had spent several days among cliffs, the openness must have felt almost enormous. The mountains remain behind, but their presence becomes smaller with distance. The army continues forward, and the journey becomes another long sequence of riding beneath the sky. The river eventually becomes large enough to dominate the landscape. Its banks are covered with vegetation, and small birds move between the trees. Alexander's scouts travel along the shore, searching for a suitable crossing. The army slows and waits. This is another moment when ancient travel becomes an exercise in patience. The river cannot be ordered to move faster or slower. Its depth must be understood. The current must be judged. Animals and supplies must be considered. A crossing point must be selected. Thousands of people may have to wait while a small group studies the water. From a modern perspective, such a delay might seem inefficient, but in the ancient world, it was simply part of traveling. Nature determined the schedule. The army had to adapt. Imagine the river at sunset while the crossing is being prepared. The surface reflects the orange sky. The wind moves through reeds along the bank. Horses stand quietly in groups. Soldiers sit on the ground and wait. Some speak softly. Others simply watch the water. The mountains are distant now, appearing as faint blue shapes beyond the plain. entire army is temporarily still. For a moment, Alexander's enormous expedition is reduced to a quiet gathering beside a river. Thousands of people are waiting for the same thing, a safe way forward. When the crossing finally begins, it is slow and careful. Horses enter the water, their hooves disappearing beneath the surface. The current moves around their legs. Soldiers guide animals and equipment. Wooden structures or boats may assist in some crossings, while shallow areas can be crossed directly. The water reflects the sky, and every movement creates ripples that spread outward. From the riverbank, the army appears fragmented, with groups moving at different speeds. Yet, eventually, everyone reaches the opposite side. Wet equipment is arranged to dry. Horses shake water from their bodies. People rest briefly. The road continues. Another obstacle has become another memory. The evening after the crossing is peaceful. The army camps on higher ground, away from the immediate riverbank. Fires burn beneath a clear sky. The horses graze. The river can still be heard in the distance. Alexander may be reviewing the next route, but the soldiers around the camp are mostly concerned with ordinary things. They eat. They repair equipment. They speak with companions. They sleep. This is the part of Alexander's journey that often disappears from historical accounts because it contains no dramatic event. Yet these quiet evenings were essential. Without them, the campaign could not continue. Rest was part of conquest. Sleep was part of strategy. Food was part of empire. Water was part of history. As the night grows deeper, the firelight becomes softer and the stars become brighter. Imagine looking across the sleeping camp and realizing how temporary everything is. The tents will be folded tomorrow. The fires will disappear. The road will carry the army somewhere else. Even the people who are awake now will eventually move on. Nothing in the camp is intended to remain permanently. The temporary nature of the settlement is almost the opposite of the monuments Alexander encountered in Persian cities. Palaces and stone terraces were built to last. Camps were built to disappear. Yet the camps may have been where most of the human experience of the campaign actually happened. The grand monuments tell us about kings and empires, but the camps tell us about ordinary movement, rest, friendship, exhaustion, and daily life. The wind crosses the plain during the deepest part of the night, and for a while it becomes the only sound. It moves across the tents and through the grass, carrying cool air from the distant mountains. The river continues its slow movement somewhere beyond the darkness. The stars remain above. Alexander's journey is now thousands of kilometers from the place where it began, but the physical world still follows the same basic rhythms. Night follows day. Water flows downhill. Wind moves across open land. Horses need rest. People sleep. Morning eventually arrives. These rhythms do not care about political ambition. They continue whether an empire is rising or falling. If we imagine the entire journey from this quiet perspective, Alexander's story becomes less about a single heroic figure and more about movement through a changing world. Macedonia was only one landscape among many. Persia was another. Central Asia was another. India was another. Each region had its own history before Alexander arrived, and each continued to have its own history after he left. His expedition was enormous, but it was still one event within much longer histories. This perspective allows the journey to become calmer. Alexander does not need to dominate every landscape in our imagination. He can simply pass through it. The mountains do not become Macedonian mountains because he crossed them. The rivers do not become his rivers. The cities do not lose their older histories. They remain what they were, while Alexander becomes another layer in their long story. Now imagine the road once again at night. The army is far away, almost invisible. Perhaps only one rider remains visible against the horizon. The horse moves slowly through the grass. The rider's cloak shifts in the wind. Above him, the stars stretch across the darkness. There is no battle, no palace, no throne, no army surrounding him in this final image. There is simply a traveler and a road. The road disappears into the distance, and the night wind continues to move across it. Somewhere beyond the next hill is another valley, but it can wait until morning. For tonight, there is nothing more to reach. The journey can pause beneath the stars, with the mountains standing quietly in the distance and the river moving through the darkness. And as the final hours of the night pass, the ancient world becomes almost completely still. The camp sleeps, the horses rest, the fires fade into glowing embers, the wind softens and then returns. The stars begin to disappear as the eastern horizon slowly becomes lighter. Another morning is coming, but there is no need to hurry toward it. The journey has already traveled through mountains, rivers, deserts, cities, plains, and distant kingdoms. Alexander has ridden farther than most people of his generation could have imagined. But the world remains larger than any one person's journey. Beyond every horizon is another landscape, and beyond every known road is another road. The unknown never truly ends. Perhaps that is why the journey can continue forever in imagination. We can always place Alexander on another quiet road, beneath another night sky, beside another river, with the wind moving gently through the grass, and the distant mountains waiting beyond the darkness. The road continues through the early morning light, and the landscape slowly changes once again as the army moves away from the river and toward the warmer lowlands. The mountains are now far behind, appearing as faint blue shapes beneath the morning haze, while the land ahead stretches almost completely flat toward the horizon. Small clusters of trees appear wherever underground water reaches the surface, and cultivated fields become more common as the army approaches settled country. After so many days among mountains and open grasslands, the sight of agriculture creates a different feeling. The land has been shaped by human hands. Irrigation channels divide the fields into narrow sections. Paths connect villages, and small mud brick buildings appear beside the roads. Farmers begin their work as the morning grows brighter, while animals are led toward grazing areas. Alexander's army passes through this landscape as one moving part of a much larger world. The people living here have their own routines, their own families, their own concerns, and their own understanding of the land. To them, the army is a temporary presence moving along the road. The soldiers may see the fields as places to obtain food or the river as a source of water, but the farmers see the same landscape as home. This difference in perspective is important when imagining ancient history. Large campaigns often look enormous when described from the viewpoint of kings, but for ordinary people living along the roads, an army was something that appeared, passed through, and eventually disappeared again. The fields remained, the river remained, the village remained. Seasons continued to change after the soldiers were gone. By afternoon, the road passes through a region where the air becomes warmer and the vegetation thicker. Palm trees rise above the surrounding fields, their leaves moving gently in the breeze, while narrow irrigation channels carry water between cultivated areas. Alexander rides near the front of the column, but the pace remains steady rather than hurried. The horses have traveled for many hours, and the heat encourages everyone to conserve energy. The road itself seems to disappear into the shimmering distance, creating the impression that the horizon is always moving farther away. Ancient travelers had no need to measure every kilometer with the precision available today. Distance was often understood through days of travel. Familiar landmarks, rivers, mountains, and settlements. A place might be described as one day's journey from another, or several days beyond a river. This way of understanding distance makes the ancient world feel different. Instead of imagining a precise line between 2 points, imagine the journey as a sequence of landscapes. First comes the river, then the hills, then the village, then the dry plain, then another river. The destination exists somewhere beyond all of them. The road is not merely connecting 2 points. It is passing through an entire world. When evening arrives, the army stops near a quiet settlement surrounded by fields and trees. The people living there watch from a distance as the temporary camp begins to form. Horses are led toward water. Soldiers unload supplies. Fires are prepared. Tents appear across the open ground. The scene is surprisingly ordinary. Nothing about the landscape announces that one of history's most famous armies is resting there. The sky turns orange above the fields, and the first stars begin appearing as the sunlight fades. A few villagers continue working, while others return home. The sound of the camp gradually becomes softer. Alexander's officers may still be discussing routes and supplies, but the wider army is settling into the familiar rhythm of evening. A meal is prepared. Equipment is placed beside tents. Animals are secured. People speak with companions. Then darkness arrives. Imagine stepping away from the camp for a moment and looking back. The fires appear as small points of light across the plain. Beyond them are the dark shapes of tents. Beyond the tents are trees and fields. Beyond the fields are hills. Above everything is the night sky. The enormous political story of Alexander's expedition becomes almost invisible. There is only a temporary camp beneath the stars. During the night, the wind moves across the cultivated land and carries the smell of grass and water toward the camp. The irrigation channels continue flowing quietly, and the palms make a soft, rustling sound whenever the breeze passes through their leaves. Somewhere nearby, an animal moves through the darkness. A horse responds with a quiet sound before settling again. The fires become lower, and most of the camp is asleep. It is difficult to imagine a more peaceful contrast to the reputation of Alexander's name. The historical Alexander is associated with conquest, ambition, and enormous armies. Yet the physical experience of his life also contained many nights like this, when nothing happened and everyone simply rested. The world did not stop because the king was asleep. The river continued moving. The wind continued blowing. The stars continued crossing the sky. Somewhere beyond the camp, people who had never heard of Alexander were also sleeping in their homes. Ancient history becomes calmer when we remember that most people were not participating in the great events later recorded by historians. They were living ordinary lives around them. The next morning, the army begins moving again, and the settlement gradually disappears behind the riders. The road continues westward, following a broad river that reflects the pale morning sky. Alexander's campaign is now part of the return journey, and familiar regions will slowly replace the unfamiliar ones. Yet the journey remains difficult because distance itself has not disappeared. Even when traveling toward home, thousands of kilometers remain. The soldiers have crossed so much land that Macedonia is still impossibly far away. The return will take time, and every day will contain another road, another camp, another river, another meal, another night. This repetition can seem almost hypnotic when imagined slowly. The horse walks. The road moves beneath its hooves. The wind changes direction. Clouds appear and disappear. The sun rises and sets. The camp is built and taken down. The cycle repeats. Over weeks and months, the landscape changes. Over years, an entire world can be crossed. Eventually, the road approaches a larger city. From a distance, the first structures appear as small shapes against the horizon, followed by walls, towers, gardens, and buildings. The army slows as it approaches. People gather near the roads. Traders move between markets. Animals carry goods. Boats travel along the river. The city feels alive in a way the remote landscapes did not. Alexander's expedition had passed through many cities, and each one would have provided a different experience. Some were Greek-speaking. Others were deeply Persian. Others belonged to older regional traditions. Their architecture, food, clothing, languages, and religious practices varied. Alexander's empire connected many of these places politically, but connection did not mean uniformity. The ancient world remained diverse. A traveler could move from one city to another and feel as though the entire character of the surrounding world had changed. Yet, the basic human rhythms remained remarkably similar. Markets opened in the morning. People worked during the day. Lamps were lit at night. Families gathered in homes. Travelers looked for places to sleep. Animals needed food and water. The city changed, but life continued according to familiar patterns. As night falls over the city, the atmosphere becomes softer. Oil lamps appear in windows and along streets. The markets gradually empty. Doors close. Voices become quieter. The river beside the city reflects small points of light, and boats move slowly through the darkness. Alexander's army is somewhere nearby, but the city itself has existed long before his arrival and will continue after his departure. Imagine walking through a quiet street after sunset, passing stone walls and mud brick buildings illuminated by small lamps. The architecture is unfamiliar, yet the feeling of nighttime is not. People are preparing to sleep. Someone closes a wooden door. Somewhere, a child is being called inside. A merchant counts the day's earnings. A traveler prepares a sleeping place. The city gradually settles into darkness. Above it, the same stars that watched Alexander cross the mountains now shine over rooftops and temples. The road beyond the city eventually leads toward Babylon, one of the most important urban centers of the ancient world. Babylon stood beside the Euphrates and had a history stretching back many centuries before Alexander. Imagine approaching it after the long eastern journey. The city rises from the surrounding landscape, its walls and monumental structures visible from a distance. The Euphrates flows beside it, carrying water through the heart of Mesopotamia. Gardens, fields, roads, canals, and settlements surround the city. After traveling through deserts and mountains, the sight of such a large and organized urban environment must have been striking. Alexander entered Babylon after his campaigns in the east, and the city became an important center during the final stage of his life. But for our journey, we can approach it slowly, without rushing toward the historical ending. Imagine the road leading toward the city during the late afternoon. The sun is low. The river reflects warm light. Palm trees move gently in the wind. The walls appear larger as the army gets closer. People gather along the roads. The sound of the city gradually replaces the open silence of the countryside. At night, Babylon becomes a different world. The monumental structures are reduced to silhouettes. The river is dark, except where moonlight touches the surface. Oil lamps glow in windows and courtyards. The city is quieter than during the day, but it is not silent. There are still travelers, guards, animals, and people moving through the streets. Somewhere near the river, a boat is being secured for the night. Somewhere in a courtyard, a family is preparing to sleep. Somewhere in the distance, music or conversation may continue. The city is enormous compared with a temporary army camp, yet both are organized around the same basic needs. People require shelter. They require food and water. They need rest. They wake with the sun and sleep when the day is finished. Alexander may have commanded armies and ruled territories, but he lived within these same natural rhythms. As the final part of the journey approaches, it becomes tempting to focus entirely on Alexander's death. But tonight, we can leave that moment at a distance. The purpose of this journey has never been to rush toward an ending. It has been to experience the road itself. Alexander's life eventually ended in Babylon in 323 BCE, but the landscapes through which he traveled continued without him. The Euphrates continued flowing. The roads continued carrying travelers. The mountains continued standing beyond the horizon. The wind continued moving across the plains. His empire fragmented after his death, and the political world changed, but the natural world remained. That contrast is one of the quietest themes in all of ancient history. Human achievements can appear enormous while they are happening, yet time gradually reduces them. Stone becomes weathered, walls collapse, roads disappear beneath soil, names become difficult to pronounce. But rivers continue to move, mountains remain visible, and the wind passes over the same land. So imagine leaving Babylon behind one final time and returning to the open country. The city disappears into the distance. The road becomes quieter. The river remains nearby for a while before turning away. The sky is clear. The moon is rising. The horse walks slowly beneath it. There is no destination that needs to be reached tonight. The road simply continues into darkness. The wind moves across the grass, carrying no message and asking for nothing. It touches the rider's cloak and passes onward. The mountains in the distance are almost invisible, but they are still there. Somewhere beyond them are the roads toward Persia, Anatolia, and eventually Macedonia. The journey home is still long, but the direction is known now. The unknown has become a collection of memories. Every distant mountain has a name. Every river has been crossed. Every great city is somewhere behind. What once seemed impossibly far away has become part of the traveler's experience. And perhaps this is where we can finally let Alexander's journey become quiet. Not because the history is finished, but because there is no need to add more noise to it. The journey has taken us across continents and through thousands of years of history, but in the end, the most memorable image may be the simplest one. A rider moving beneath the night sky while the wind crosses an empty landscape. The famous battles fade, the palaces fade, the armies fade, the political ambitions fade. What remains is the road, the horse, the mountains, the river, and the night. The same natural world that surrounded Alexander surrounds us in imagination now. The wind moves gently through the grass. The river continues flowing somewhere below. The stars remain above the dark horizon. The horse keeps walking at the same slow pace, carrying the traveler farther into the quiet. There is no need to know what waits beyond the next hill. For tonight, the journey can remain unfinished, because the unknown is not a problem to solve. It is simply the darkness beyond the horizon, waiting quietly for another morning. The night settles once more over the road beyond Babylon, and the final stage of our journey becomes less about where Alexander is going and more about the feeling of having traveled so far. The distant city, lights gradually disappear behind the horizon, leaving only the open landscape and the soft movement of the wind. The horse continues at the same gentle pace, its footsteps becoming almost part of the natural rhythm of the night. The road beneath it is old, worn by countless travelers who came before Alexander, and by countless others who would come afterward. Somewhere beneath the dust are the traces of merchants, soldiers, farmers, messengers, pilgrims, and wanderers who followed similar paths across the ancient world. None of them could see the entire future of the road. They only knew the next part of the journey. That is how every long journey is experienced. We may imagine the whole route when looking backward through history, but the people who lived it experienced only the immediate landscape. They saw the next hill, the next river, the next settlement, and the next sunrise. Alexander could not see the full shape of his own legacy. His soldiers could not know how historians would remember them. The people living beside the roads could not know that their landscapes would one day become part of stories told thousands of years later. They simply lived, traveled, worked, rested, and watched the seasons pass. Tonight, as the road becomes quieter and the stars become brighter, we can allow that perspective to return. Alexander is no longer a distant figure commanding an enormous empire. He is simply a rider beneath the night sky, moving slowly through a world that is much older and much larger than any one human life. The wind becomes softer as the night approaches its deepest hour, and the landscape seems almost motionless, except for the occasional movement of grass and the slow flow of the river somewhere beyond the road. The mountains have disappeared into darkness, but their presence can still be felt because the wind arrives from their direction, cool and clean against the warmer air of the plain. The horse pauses briefly, then continues forward. There is no urgency. The road does not end tonight. The destination can wait. In the distance, a faint light appears and disappears behind a low ridge, perhaps a small settlement or another traveler carrying a lamp. Then it is gone again, and the landscape returns to darkness. Above, the stars remain scattered across the sky, just as they would have appeared to Alexander and to the countless people who traveled these lands long before him. The ancient world may feel distant because its buildings, languages, political systems, and customs have changed, but the night itself is not entirely unfamiliar. Darkness still arrives. Wind still moves across open land. Rivers still flow. Horses still breathe in the cold air. Mountains still become silhouettes beneath the stars. These simple continuities make it possible to imagine the past without needing to recreate every detail. We can simply sit beside the road and listen to the same kinds of sounds that have accompanied travelers for thousands of years. Eventually, the eastern horizon begins to brighten again, almost too slowly to notice. The stars nearest the horizon disappear first, followed by the fainter stars above them. The grass becomes visible in shades of gray, and the outline of the river emerges from the darkness. The horse raises its head as the first birds begin calling from distant trees. Another day is beginning. The journey will continue, but there is no need to describe every road or every mile. Alexander's journey has already carried us across an enormous world, from the mountains of Macedonia to the Mediterranean, across Anatolia and Persia, through Mesopotamia and Central Asia, over great rivers and mountain passes, and toward the distant landscapes of India before turning back toward Babylon. The historical expedition eventually ended, but the roads themselves did not. Travelers continued using many of these routes for centuries. Kingdoms changed. Languages changed. Cities grew and declined. New religions spread. New rulers appeared. Old monuments became ruins. Yet the landscape continued its quiet work. Rivers carried water. Mountains held snow. Grass returned with the seasons. Wind moved across the plains. Dawn followed night. And so, as the first sunlight touches the distant hills, we can leave Alexander there, not at the moment of his death, but as a traveler disappearing slowly into the larger flow of history. His name remains, his story remains, and his journey remains one of the most remarkable journeys of the ancient world. But the night wind has no need to remember his name. It simply moves across the road, across the river, across the mountains, and onward into another morning. Now the road is quiet, the sky is becoming brighter, and the final image can remain simple and peaceful. Imagine the horse standing for a moment on a low ridge, while the first sunlight spreads across the landscape below. The river shines like a narrow silver ribbon between the fields. The mountains in the distance are slowly turning from dark blue to soft gold. The wind moves through the grass in long, gentle waves, and somewhere behind you, the last traces of the sleeping camp are beginning to disappear into the morning. There is nothing left to conquer in this moment, nothing that needs to be reached, and nothing that needs to be explained. The journey has become the destination. The road, the wind, the rivers, the mountains, the deserts, the cities, and the endless sky have all become part of one long passage through the ancient world. Alexander will eventually disappear from the landscape, as every traveler does, but the road continues beyond him. Another traveler will come. Another horse will walk across the dust. Another campfire will glow beside the river. Another person will look toward the mountains and wonder what lies beyond them. And perhaps that is the quietest ending for a journey into the unknown. Not a final wall, not a final battle, and not a final destination, but another horizon waiting beyond the one we can see. The night wind fades into the morning breeze. The river continues its slow movement, and the ancient road stretches peacefully toward the light.